Okay, so let's kick off. So Jonathan, you say that you used to be an atheist. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that would have been over a decade ago. I'm 33 now.
Okay,
But probably like from 19 to 21, I was an atheist.
right. Oh, okay. So you were a theist, and before that, is that right?
Yeah, I was on my own when I was like 17. I went to Southern Baptist Church, and then and I was very religious then, but I think I saw the pitfalls in the religion, so I just reverted all the way to atheist.
Okay,
And then when I was 21, I couldn't quite go stay atheist, so I switched to a theist, just agnostic.
okay. So if it's okay to ask, what did you believe as you were growing up? Did you have a family belief, or did you believe something when you were younger, or?
Yeah, so till the age I was 10, we were Catholic, and then we
Oh,
left
right.
church. So for most of my teenage years, I really wasn't involved in religion at all.
Right. So grew up Catholic, teenage years, kind of not really involved in religion, became Baptist for a period of time,
Yeah,
and
for about years.
and then that didn't work for you, and then you became an atheist, and then about 10 years ago you became a theist again. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess, well, about 10 years ago, I guess I was technically agnostic.
Right.
Like, I just left it as, like, well, I don't know. But then
Gotcha.
I would say in November, I had a religious experience, and
Okay.
that's when I became a theist again.
Okay. Is it a particular denomination of theism that you believe after you had that experience, or do you just have a belief in a god or deity?
See, yeah, here's the thing. Like, sometimes I'm open to the idea of I'm open to the idea of monotheism, and also open to the idea of polytheism, uh,
Right.
or
Okay.
something like a force, or I guess like a not. I guess possibly this may not even be an entity, just a system, of rules, kind of possibly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There are definitions of God that, excuse me, there are definitions of God that get complicated, for sure. So just looking back at this sort of personal experience that you had then that um, brought you back into a sort of theistic mindset. If that personal experience hadn't occurred to you, do you think you would still be a theist today?
I would actually probably still call myself agnostic.
Right.
Um, yeah, and I mean this is a big thing with it. I was actually in a manic phase when it happened. Like, I was only sleeping like 2 hours a night for like 3 weeks, and I was definitely high energy to the point where sometimes it felt like I was on a drug.
Right.
And yeah, at one point, I really felt like I saw this bright light, and I wasn't aware I was in a manic state when all this was happening. But after I came off of it, I sat and I was like trying to decide whether I believe in it or not. And I know after that experience, I now believe that good is a thing. Like, before that, I was probably more nihilistic philosophy wise.
Mm.
Or are you familiar with the term hedonistic?
Headness. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was more hedonistic, like, or yeah, nihilistic at points. And but now I'm definitely like that there is a good, and I don't know. I guess I believe the idea that, like, there's by really choosing good, that cosmic forces will help out in some way. And I
Okay.
and by good I mean truth, finding truth in scenarios, from all perspectives, um, finding beauty in things.
Could your experience of the bright light could you have been mistaken about the nature of that bright light, and yet things like truth and goodness still be things that exist in the world?
Yes. Yes.
And when you say that good is in the world, what do you mean by a good in that sense? How do you feel that the word what do you feel the word good means in this sense?
Yeah. Now, I guess before that scenario, I would have saw that good. Well, yeah, before that scenario, I guess I would have kind of saw as I saw as animals, and that like people who are more dominant, like love the word good and love to tell people to act good, and like a lot of times they use the word good as like being submissive, you know. So I didn't really like the word good, but now I see it as there is actual good in the sense of I don't have a high degree of certainty here, but I would say that there is a good that is absolute potentially.
Okay, that's cool. So I hear that you used to feel that good meant something like complying to some dominance requirement, right? That it
Yeah,
was a and so you were good if you fell in line. Am I understanding that correctly? You were good if you followed the rules and obeyed.
exactly. Yeah, and I saw being good as a bad thing.
Right. Okay. And now you've come to have a different understanding of the term good. How would you characterize this new type of goodness?
See, like I guess I'm gonna step back for a second. Like I guess
Sure.
I see it as like let's say life is a game, and in this game the whole game is just figuring out the rules. So it's like I guess I see it. I'm having a hard time defining good because to me right now the whole objective is just figuring it out. But I guess I see it as I'll tell you. Actually, I'll tell you this. It's I think the big part of it is being able to see another person for who they are, letting them exist, while at the same time allowing myself to exist.
Right. Right. I think that sounds like that sounds like a good way to think about things for sure. As in maybe if I could offer a suggested definition of good, I guess something that optimizes for better outcomes, results in better outcomes. Could we maybe think about that as a definition of good? How would you feel about that definition in relation to how you currently think about good?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my struggle with that definition is because it talks about better outcomes. Because a lot of folks might see a better outcome as like, well, I'll tell you this: a big thing I notice human beings do is they're like, oh, if we want peace, people should just stop complaining, and I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because
Mm,
people's complaints might be valid. So I guess
right.
so. With that definition of a better, uh, how did you define it as better outcomes? Because to them, their idea of a better outcome is different than mine in that scenario.
Right. So I think a lot of people said, so now I guess we would just talk about the difference between subjective good and objective good. So, uh, just firstly, like, are you comfortable with the term subjective and objective, as in one is about personal experience and the other is like a truth about the world?
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. And to explain my perspective on that, I would say, um, So ultimately, it is all subjective. At the same time, I see it as if you have two people with two completely different views on subjective good, if they both sit and really try to understand each other, I think they would ultimately come closer to the objective good. So I see
Mm,
no one person knows what the objective good actually is. So it is all subjective. Even though it is all subjective, I don't think that rules out the possibility of an objective good.
interesting. Yeah. Like a lot of moral statements, it's important to understand what the objective is before you can say whether a particular course of action is morally good or bad. So yeah, I like that. So you're saying if we could agree on what the actual situation is and where we need it to get to, we could also therefore agree on what would be considered objectively good about in the context of those agreements. So does that make sense? Sorry.
That's okay. I got a little distracted. Do you mind repeating the last few
Oh
sentences?
yeah, no problem. Okay, so so goodness is often is like a moral assertion essentially, and I think what I'm hearing you say, and for I would agree with you. I think that if two people can agree where we currently are and where we need to get to, we can start to talk about a good path to get there. So we can say something objectively true about what is good in the context of getting to our objective.
Yeah,
But if we can't agree where we are, like if we disagree about what the current situation is and we can't agree about our destination, then we can't agree about what is a good path to take to get to that destination.
yeah, yeah. And I really think, yeah, in those scenarios, see, this isn't a common thing in society, but I do think, um, yeah, if we can't agree on a destination, like, I think it's important for both of us to allow ourselves to separate, which you already did at the beginning of the video, um, as opposed to forcing the other person to try to have the same goals as me, you know?
Right, right. Well, we can certainly recognize that we all have different perspectives and experiences and see the world differently, and therefore that might result, well, we would expect that therefore to result in different ideas about what might be good in this moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the perfect example of that is politics. Like we all want a better society, but there's obviously huge disagreements there.
Yes, yeah, and different motivations, and yeah, that's a great example. So, bringing this a little bit back to God, how do you see God plays a role in the idea of what is good in your view?
So I am open to the idea that he does that potentially God does leave signs, or um, when somebody really has stuck to trying to figure out what good is, he'll help them through those scenarios. I guess here's an example. The other day, I was. Let me know if you can't hear me because there's a car that's pulling up. But
We're all good.
the other day, there was this lady in the parking lot, and I normally don't give money to people, but she specifically asked for $2, so I gave her the $2 so I gave her $2 because all I had was $2 in on my wallet. So I gave it to her because it's the exact amount I had, and then she started crying. I know this is by no means proof, but I then asked her like what it was, and she really wanted to buy her son a pizza, and I actually believe she was being honest with me. Um, but See, I mean, yeah, that literally could have just been complete coincidence. Um,
Oh,
in
it
that,
sounds like a beautiful moment. I mean, it sounds, you know, you made a connection with a stranger. You made them feel good. You helped them out in a moment when they needed it to. You didn't ask for anything in return. And, you know, that sounds like a really sweet thing to do.
yeah, it was. Yeah, I definitely felt like I connected with her there.
Cool. So how might you feel? I'm hearing that you're not sure that this was a particularly good example of maybe God acting in this narrative, but how, if you were to think it, how would you see God might have acted in this idea of what had just happened?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's just also because I guess what you're asking is like, did God somehow work it out to where she specifically needed $2 and that I specifically somehow had $2? Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I think I might need to step back for a second because I used to would have said that everything was just a chain reaction. I would have said that if there, let's say we had an incredibly huge computer that it pretty much was God that happened to exist back in the Big Bang. So I even believed in the atheist, even if there was no God and and atheism was right. I still think it all would have been chain reactions. But now I'm open to the idea. I guess I should have said this. If the computer was back at the Big Bang when the Big Bang was happening, I would have said it would have been able to predict this moment, this exact moment. But now I don't necessarily believe in that. I believe more in free will. Um, I believe everything's not set in stone.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So, I mean, exactly how God might have worked, how God would have, like, maybe God gave her a feeling to say the $2 thing.
Mm,
Because I'll say this, I actually think I would have had, I think I did have the choice to not give her the $2.
right.
But I do think uh, the fact that she said $2 is what encouraged me to say yes. So it's like, what would have had to happen to get her to say $2? Because she might have just asked for money, or yeah, I guess it all. I think it all depends on how do cosmic forces affect our brain and the decisions we make, and I have no idea.
It's a great answer. I have no idea either. Yeah, that would be a great answer. So, what reason might we have to believe that God had intervened in that scenario that you described? And again, I recognize you weren't sure whether this was something that would be pointing to God or not. But what part of it was it? Just the coincidence of that you happened to have $2 and she happened to be asking for $2? That coincidence seemed to be more than just a coincidence to you, and maybe suggested that there was some intervention at play.
Yeah, I guess uh, it was more of the fact that she cried that to me was more of, I don't want to use the word proof. I wish I knew another word, as more of, if there was any evidence, is more of that to me was the more of the evidence that I made the right decision, or that it wasn't coincidence. But it's still not quite evidence.
Yeah, it's cool. So I think it sounds like a really beautiful moment. Like it sounds like you made a sort of, important human connection with somebody at a moment where they just needed something, and you were able to help them, and they were very grateful for that. And I think that's quite a powerful little moment. And I don't know. I guess there are different ways we could look at this. We could say that somehow God made it so that this lady needed $2 and was upset about that. And we could say that God also conspired to making sure that for some reason you happen to only have $2 in your pocket at the time. And that this was an elaborate test that was somehow all about you and God wanting to understand how you would react under these circumstances. Now, I don't think we could disprove that. Like, as you say, cosmic forces may be at play, and that we couldn't say for sure that they weren't. We could be in a simulation. You talked about a computer at the beginning of the Big Bang. Maybe we're in a computer game. Maybe this is all a simulation, and maybe there is somebody manipulating the parameters of the computer game such that they are engineering scenarios and testing what people, whatever we are, might do under certain circumstances. I couldn't prove to you that that wasn't the case, but it's also just possible that the $2, the amount, was just a coincidence. And it's possible that you just made a stranger very happy and did a kind thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's completely possible as well. Would it be helpful if I brought up another scenario, or should we stick with this one?
I think we can move on in a second, but I would just like to point out, like, I think the question that's interesting about this now is there any reason to believe? Not, we can't. I will fully agree. We cannot disprove, God had intervened in this scenario, and I cannot disprove that we're not in a computer game. Maybe we're in an alien computer somewhere, and they're simulating all of this and doing experiments on our. Maybe we're all brains in a vat in some weird dystopian future, or maybe we're something that neither of us have ever imagined before, and that whatever's going on is beyond our understanding or imagination. Maybe all of these things are true. Maybe there's a God, and God is engineering this. All of these things are potentially possible, and I couldn't disprove them. But is there any reason to believe that they're true?
Yeah, so the main reason I believe it is mostly because of that experience in November, and most of the experiences I've been having since then. Like, as an example, I've been able to go without alcohol since February now. I only drank once since then, and which still doesn't prove it either, because it could be placebo, My reason, I guess you asked what reason for me to believe it. A reason for me to believe that there is a God, and I still use the word God loosely because it can mean a bunch of different things.
Sure.
But I do think the reason I believe it is because by me believing in it, even if it is placebo, I do think it is bringing me to a place where I interact with the world in a more positive way for myself and the world. But I think it's more than that, because if it's not true, I mean, ultimately, this is the ultimate truth. I don't know whether it is or not. I keep searching, though. I think this is an important detail to add up to. This God belief, the main thing it affects my life is I spend a lot of time researching ancient religions, particularly Judaism and Egyptian, because apparently Judaism borrowed a lot from Egypt, which makes perfect sense. But I think the main reason I do is just the main reason I'm pursuing this idea of God is to really figure out if God is really there.
Sure.
Yeah.
I really, one thing I just want to say is, like, I really value you saying you don't know. like as often as you are doing. I think that's like there is a there is a lot of uncertainty in the world, and we often feel compelled to find an answer or reach for an answer when maybe not only do we not have sufficient reasons to reach for the answer, but also maybe we don't actually need to reach for the answer. And
Yeah.
I can give you an example of that I like to use quite a lot, which is that the universe, reality as it is either infinite, which I can't get my head around. As a human being, I can't get my head around the infinity of the universe, right? It's just, I can say the word infinity and I know what it means, but I don't have any kind of comprehensive understanding of what that might mean. How can something really truly be infinite? That's baffling to me. Or the universe is finite, which means it had a beginning and that there was something. I mean, again, that doesn't make any sense to me. How can there be a before reality? And how can there be an after reality potentially? So if it's infinite, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I can just be open about that and say that I don't understand it. And if it's finite, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I can be okay with just saying like that I don't understand it. Or the reality or the universe is something else. It's some other thing, and that doesn't make any sense to me. If something's neither infinite nor finite, I don't know what it is, and it doesn't make any sense to me. And so the only thing I can say for certain about my understanding of reality and the universe and how it all works is that I know I don't understand it. And it might not be very comforting, but it's quite relaxing just recognizing that. And that's not to say that we shouldn't try to understand it or we shouldn't try to learn more. But I think it's surprising to me how few people are willing just to recognize the obvious truth, which is that we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to reach back real quick just to touch on something you mentioned before, which was like you mentioned that these experiences have led to you interacting in the world in a more positive way, and I think that's and I'm glad about that. But I'd also like to ask you to maybe reflect on this slightly strange question, which is why is it better to interact with the world in a positive way? Why is it better for you to interact with in the world in a positive way?
Yeah, so you kind of broke up on me, but I believe you asked, how has it led to me interacting with the world in a positive way?
Actually, slightly differently. I was asking why is it better that you are interacting with the world in a positive way?
Yeah, yeah, it might help if I clarify how I was interacting with it in a negative way. I used to be somebody who just drank all the time, and to me, it's like if I was hedonist, it was like pleasure. So to me, sex was like I felt like sex was the whole point of existence. It's like that's the best feeling thing there is. So I might as well try to get as much as that as possible. Um, Also, if somebody was a jerk, it's like I would just be a jerk back. I would flip people off when I was driving. Um, I would curse at people all the time. Um, I guess. But yeah, so why is it better that I'm not doing those things now? Uh,
Right.
yeah, so there's two parts of me speaking up right now. Like, one is the nihilist part, which is like, hey, there's no point. Who cares? Let's just be chaotic. I guess to me, earlier you said, you know, why should I think you said maybe we don't need to um, find find if there is a divine being that's infinite, maybe we don't have to find it. And I agree with that. I'm not going to pressure anybody into try to look for it. Um, I think ultimately, I will say this: I wasn't necessarily happy how I was before. Um, And I don't know if I can come up with an answer for why the positive is better until I possibly learn more. Because I don't even know if this thing's mono, if we're in a, if it's one god or if it's multiple gods.
Well, before we talk about that though, let's look at the experience that you had with the lady and the $2, right? So in that experience, like you certainly would have felt, I'm sure, that you had at least two options of how you could act. You could have continued to walk past her and ignored her. That would have been hedonistic. It would have been self-serving. It would have been you would have been $2 richer. You wouldn't need to care what she thought. Or you could have given her the $2 that you had in your pocket. And you could have seen her reaction and maybe felt something in response to that reaction. And I guess one question I would ask is, which do you think of those two scenarios was better for you, or would have been better for you?
I do think giving her the $2 was better for me.
Right. It sounds like it was a nice experience.
Yeah.
I'm not sure in America, the way the economy is, that $2 could get you much of a better experience.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Do you mind if I switch a little bit on our perspective of good?
Sure.
From my perspective, I have a lot of atheist friends, and actually one thing that converted me to atheism back when I was like 19 was I noticed some of the nicest people I knew were atheists. And to me, that's wild that like there's a lot of atheists who are very inspired to do good, like humanists, and they'll do things like clean up the environment or start a charity. Or I know a lot of atheists who volunteer. It's in some ways you can almost say there's more atheists who do good than religious people, and there's a lot of theories we could drive off that. Like one could be like atheists, for one, it could maybe possibly in a way disprove religions, but or I guess it's saying that somebody doesn't need religion in order to do good. I think that's the main thing it proves. But I don't know. I'm always amazed by when an atheist does good things.
Well, interesting. Again, I don't want to keep staying in the same place if you want to move on, but I do think this is a great example, because I think, let's just say that it's possible that you were wrong about this experience you had, this personal experience you had with the light, and that your understanding of it was a misunderstanding. But as a result of that misunderstanding, you've now noticed that you acted perhaps differently. I don't know, I'm assuming, but would you say that you're, prior to having that experience, that the previous slightly hedonistic self would not have given the $2 to the lady, or do you think you would still have done that even before?
Hedonistic version of me would not have given it to her.
All right, cool. So you've now learned something about the world and how you could be interacting with it differently, that results in what you now are saying is a positive outcome for you. And I think even if you were wrong about your experience with that light and what that was, even if your interpretation of that was wrong, I still think that experience that you had with the $2 and the lady would still have been just as beneficial to you in doing what we might describe as the good thing.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I wonder whether, if we think about this as something that God is doing, in some ways we might be missing the fact that maybe this is also something that you were doing, that this isn't just God acting through you to do something wonderful, but maybe this was just something you did and have noticed now that it was good. So even if so I guess the question is, if we were to go back in time and we were to prove to you that somehow that experience that you had with the light was wrong, knowing what you know now about how giving the $2 to the lady felt, would you still want to give the $2 to the lady, even if you were to learn that the light wasn't what you thought it was?
I would still want to give it to her. I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much, though, I
Oh,
guess.
interesting.
Yeah, because as I'm like diving into this religion, I think part of it is humility, of because they're giving the $2. The reason it felt so good was because it's like, well, there's something bigger than me that's going on here, and with the but like, yeah, let's say if like we got a time machine, we took me to a year ago,
Mhm.
and I somehow was able to convince my old self to give somebody $2. And even if she did cry, I don't think I would have saw the beauty in it. Because yeah, back to the beauty in it is that there's something going on here that's bigger than myself, even though I don't understand what it is.
Can I say that as an atheist, as a lifelong atheist, I completely agree with that sentiment.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Okay.
Like it would be a, as kind of as my previous example was trying to suggest, like I don't know whether I know I don't understand the universe, the reality as it is. The one thing I can say for sure is that I don't know. I don't understand it. And so there is definitely something bigger than my own personal experience seemingly going on. And I may not have any idea about what that is. But that's okay. You know, it certainly feels okay to me that I don't know. And I will try to, I guess, fumble my way through reality, life, and figure it out as I go along.
Yeah. I want to add too, I don't think um, if I actually don't if God is just, I don't think he's going to send you to hell just because you're an atheist. I know that's just my opinion, but I'm just going to say it doesn't sound just for a God to send you to hell just because you don't believe in him, you know? He obviously didn't set it up where we had to believe in him.
So that there's some really strange things when you think about morality through the lens of a god. And it somebody was talking to me the other day about their experiences as a Catholic. They've now left Catholicism, but they were talking about getting sick, and they were sick for a little while, and their grandmother, and then they got better after a lot of surgery and a lot of doctors' attention. And their grandmother said that they'd gotten better because she had been praying for her. Fair enough. But if you are willing to believe that the reason why the lady in question got better was because you prayed to God to ask him, her, it to help and intervene, then you also might be inclined to think that God was the reason that she got sick in the first place, and that God had done that to her on purpose.
Yeah.
And you might also then start to wonder why God needed to be begged, pleaded with, prayed to, asked to help in that situation. And I think that, for example, if you were to get sick, and as a theist, as somebody who believed in God, not only would you have to grapple with the difficulty of getting sick, but you'd also have to start questioning why God was choosing to do this to you. And you hear lots of people do that. They say they're testing me. He's testing me. You hear that quite often. It's always a test. I had a thought experiment, or it wasn't really a thought experiment. It was kind of it was amusing, really, a sort of challenge of sorts, which is that I wonder if any particular religious denomination gets discounted health insurance. Like, do Catholics, if they can prove that they're genuinely a Catholic, do you think that they would get less coverage? Would their health insurance be cheaper?
Yeah.
Because prayer would be helping, presumably, and God would be helping, looking after them and paying attention to them. Is any religion getting a discount?
Well, yeah, and within that, most people who believe in prayer would say that the prayers don't always work, so it is.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah, it would be very easy to test if they did always work, and then we would have good answers, right?
Yeah. I will say this, back to how you talk about, like, ultimately, yeah, if we were saying prayer brought him out of the bed, out of his illness, then it's like, yeah, then what brought him there? There actually is a philosophical phrase for that. It's called the problem of evil.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's, I was looking up a bunch of terms on it. Like, there's a bunch of theories for why there is evil. Like, yeah, there's a term for it's like disdemology or something. I can send it to you after this.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'm familiar with the problem of evil for sure. And interestingly, so the problem of evil is only really a problem for theology. It's not a problem for atheism, because from an atheist perspective, it's kind of exactly what you'd expect when you've got creatures such as us interacting en masse in complex social systems. Coming from the trees, as we may well have done. I believe we have. We did. I don't know if you believe in evolution. But you do. Cool. So yeah. I mean, we're evolved from certainly not non-human ape-like creatures that definitely have been getting better at being social, but still haven't perfected it. I think you only have to look at, as you say, quite well, political discourse these days to see how badly we've not really mastered socializing and solving problems as a group. But yeah, like as we get better at that, hopefully get better at that, the problem of evil is going to be an apparent phenomenon. It's not a problem for atheism for sure, but certainly a problem for those that want to believe that there's a loving and forgiving God that's looking after everybody. That's a real challenge. Yeah.
Oh, dude, I want to add this to the power about being good. Like, so, I'm not a Christian, but I read the Bible all the time. But in Paul's letters, it's in Romans like 5, 6, and 7. He talks about this idea of freedom from the law. And what it's talking about is, like, obviously us learning, like, we haven't mastered, because you were talking about how we haven't mastered being good, but one big thing I look at as I need a better word than proof, but I guess potentially a clue is, I noticed through religion, at first you have the law, like, and that could be your conscience of saying, hey, it's bad to curse at people. But as I grow in my religion and understanding, I will lose the desire to curse at people. And that's the power I see in religion. But I see atheists do the same thing. Like, it's really empathy is really all it is.
Right. Yeah. And it comes with age as well as, I would imagine, religion and anything else. I think the older you get, the more you realize, well, the more experience you have of not just the world but also yourself. You've made enough mistakes now that you're more willing to see them in others and accept them in others and be less critical of them for making them. You've encountered more people in the world, and you've understood that your way of seeing the world is not nearly as analogous to everybody else as you might have thought when you were younger, and realized that people have got just an insanely complex array of different experiences and backgrounds and histories and biology, physical experiences of the world, all kinds of different things that will play into, a large number of complex scenarios that result in different things, and that you're only one perspective in that huge cloud of different perspectives. And so recognizing that your experiences don't necessarily map to those of other people, I think is hugely important. And that, again, that comes with age and experience. And not everybody gets it, because not everybody has the opportunity to have the experience necessarily. Traveling, for example, tends to make people more empathetic, less racially divided. That's doesn't seem like a coincidence to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is where we're lucky too, like the fact, because you live in England, right?
Afraid so.
Yeah, like here, you and me, like we don't even have to travel anymore to experience other cultures.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I love about the Street Epistemology Discord server is that it's a collection of, for the most part, I won't say exclusively, but certainly for the most part, very nice, charming people from all over the world that are coming together to try to have good, honest conversations with each other. And I think that gives me hope for something, for sure. That makes me feel good.
Yeah. Wait, so that gives me hope as well. So I guess, like, well, you obviously, do you believe that good is a thing? Like,
do I believe that good is a thing? I believe some things feel good to me. That's for sure. Like dopamine responses in my brain will make me feel that something is good. So that could be something like sugar would make me feel good in some sense. But also then acting in a way that makes me happy. So if I, if my wife makes me breakfast in the morning, that will make me feel good. That she cared for me enough to do that, and that would make me feel good. If I see something really, if I see a cat playing in the street, I might watch the cat playing in the street for like a little while, and that might make me feel good. I can also say that, I think I will definitely have the negative impulse, right? So you could say in some ways, if you're lucky in any case, that the goodness is the absence of badness in the world. If I was to see a man walking down the street and there's a dog and he kicks the dog, I would definitely feel empathy for the dog. I would want the dog not to be harmed. I would want to believe that I would be saddened to find that I was living in a world where people might choose to kick a dog. I would be worried about what kind of men would make those choices, and that I might have to interact with them in my society at some point, and that would make me sad and concerned. But then, if the man, turned around and the dog jumped up at him and was very happy to see him, then that would make me happy. I would think that was a good thing. So I think goodness, like in terms of like emotional responses to things, I think is very much grounded in empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is, I guess, back to the God thing or the light thing. See, I ultimately think the goal with good is to find, because how you were describing it earlier was, well, you talked about how SE gave you hope, and
the community for sure. Yeah.
And it gives me hope too. And to me, the reason it gives me hope, and I think it's the same for you, is that, I mean, most of us, when we think of good, it's like this idea of unity and peace, especially throughout the world. And I think it's really possible. And I guess, I don't know, back to the problem of evil things. Have you ever seen Smallville?
Oh, the Superman. A long time ago, I think I saw it. This is the Superman TV show, right? Where he's Clark Kent still.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Pleasantville.
Oh, Pleasantville. Rings a bell, but I couldn't say what it was.
Okay, so it's got Reese Witherspoon, and the idea is he gets sucked into an old old TV show. Like, are you familiar with Leave It to Beaver or Andy Griffith?
No.
Okay, well, I don't know what black and white shows were like in England, but like here they were very like nothing bad ever happened.
Right, right, right. Yes.
And so they're sucked into this movie, and because they went in, they introduced sin into that world, and it led to people like having sex in the movie and fires happening, and um, I don't know. I guess to me that movie really showed that just how boring that world is and how oppressive that is. But um, I mean, I'll say this: I actually think it's a good thing that there is evil. I guess there's a lot of reasons why we could say there's evil, but I actually think it's a good thing that there is evil because there's something we have to overcome. And others might say because the growth because it brings growth. Um,
Hmm. Might other things bring growth? Might there be other challenges in the world that we could overcome, like increasing our knowledge, improving conditions, those sorts of things? Are there other ways we could explore growth without there needing to be what we might describe as evil in the world?
yeah, so I guess yeah, in order for us to gain knowledge, I'd say we need the lack of knowledge, and the lack of knowledge ultimately ultimately leads to evil. You know, like if I don't know how to do a good thing, I'm probably going to make mistakes. If because as an example, obvious or humans throughout the world didn't know that slavery was bad, which is absurd to me that people didn't realize slavery was bad.
Well, yeah, there's, I can, I think I can understand how something even as horrific as slavery could become normalized. I don't know if normalizing is the same as not realizing it's bad. I think it's about selectively applying empathy in some ways. And I think humans have a slightly alarming capacity to um, be be malleable in that way. I genuinely think if you were to ask people during the time of peak slavery in America, you know, if it was bad, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. They would genuinely be confused. But I think in some sense it might be a form of willful ignorance. I feel like it must be a form of willful ignorance. And again, as I say, selectively applied empathy. But
Yeah.
but I am slightly reminded of the narrative of Satan in the Bible. There's some scholarly research that I read a pop sci article on, or a pop theology article on at some point, which describes this idea that Satan is comes from a Hebrew word, which is, I think it's something like Satan, which means adversary, and that the original Abrahamic narrative was not that Satan was this fallen angel, but actually Satan was the somebody who was there in God's court, as it were, whose job it was to challenge God's assumptions and try to provide a counterpoint to any particular position you might ask. You could then you could say maybe that version of Satan was an early street epistemologist, if that isn't giving the theists that dislike SE or too much to work with. But in some sense, I think there was this idea that Satan was who is now the symbol of evil, could have been said historically, to have been perhaps just the spirit of challenge and adversity. And I think you would be right, absolutely, in saying that a huge amount of growth comes from challenge, because it's very rewarding overcoming challenge. I don't know if that necessarily is what most people would consider by the idea of evil, but I will happily take your definition.
Yeah, like Yeah, I mean that's a whole thought there too of if there is an evil God. Because recently I was studying Egyptology and like because they definitely really into this idea of light versus dark, and they're they're good gods. One was Osiris, but Osiris is killed, and then he has a son named Horus, who's all about order and light and goodness. And I don't know if they use the word goodness, but definitely order and peace. And Set, he's also called Seth sometimes. Set is um
God of death.
yeah, I don't know if he's the god of death because Osiris was the good god, but now he's the one who leads you to the afterlife. And but Set might also be god of death, but Set is supposed to be like chaos and disorder, confusion, chaos and confusion, and um, but anyhow, so there's a lot of different stories for Moses that are ancient history, and we don't know, and there's no historical proof that there were a bunch like 2 million Jews led across the desert, um, but the Egyptians believe that time period is like the that Moses worshipped the god Set, and apparently their idea is that the whole when you go in, the high priest is only allowed to go in the Holy of Holies once a year, and he's the only one allowed to go in there. And his idea was that possibly the Jews worshipped an evil god. And they didn't want the Jewish people to know that. It's just an interesting idea.
I think like, look, the 2000 plus years ago, writing was just becoming a thing. Societies were forming under complex ideas of relatively new ideas. Societies were just trying to make that transition from being a society to a civilization. There was an awful lot of divide between those that could write things down and those that couldn't.
Yeah.
And even what should be written down and how. And it's entirely unsurprising to me that during those turbulent times, myths and legends erupted, evolved, got passed down, got changed. You could very easily imagine at least a plausible scenario where something very mundane happened one day, and in its retelling of the story, it started to gain embellishments, and that eventually it became an entirely fictional story of supernatural-esque character, and that legend gets picked up by different civilizations and groups and societies, and just it gets passed on and eventually gets written down in different forms, and maybe one story becomes 50 different stories and they get different names because different cultures respond differently to different names, and so they rename them or mistranslate them, all kinds of things. And so it's sort of it would be incredibly strange to me that if we didn't have a huge body of conflicting, similar sort of shared origins type stories from that time. I mean, this it would be strange, and so that's not to say that I could say that any of them I definitely know to be false. I could say some of them are more unlikely than others for sure, but it would also mean I think we could be reasonably skeptical about the actual verisimilitude of any of those particular documents. They are great records and they're really valuable, and it's great to read them and study them and understand that even if they're not literally true, maybe they are an interesting sociological record of what happened. But I wonder, I fear a little bit those that seek for too much wisdom in that sort of melting pot of language and society and culture, and just, and I think it might be a bit like reading tea leaves. You can start to see patterns, and that seems to, because you're making this connection of seeing patterns in these things, it becomes quite compelling, and that you've spotted something and that makes it feel more true. I'm not saying you specifically, but you definitely hear people reading them in this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, as I do try to listen, like I'm a science spinner, that's my job. I do like to really listen to scholars. But yeah, like as I'm going through these things, um, it is affecting my beliefs. And I definitely do have to be skeptical of my own beliefs there.
I
Um,
think everybody does.
I,
I really hope everybody should be more, including myself. Absolutely. But yeah,
it,
sorry. I agree with you.
but you are right. Like, is I mean, I bet most scholars probably would agree with you. Like, it's just this big jumbled mess. And back to how you're talking about the um, in those days, like when people wrote and how things got added onto stories, and there's all this mythology. We do know, because see, the big out of all the ancient texts, probably the Bible is the one that gets looked at the most, but um, so it kind of gets picked on the most too. Um, but anyhow, I think yeah, most scholars would say like um, the Jewish religion a lot of times when it encountered another culture, and if they ran into somebody who had a god that could do something incredible, they would then add it to their story. And I'm sure it wasn't just the Jews who did it, um, but
Oh,
uh,
of course. Yeah. Yeah, definitely not. I mean, Christmas, for example, is, famously not the birthday of Jesus, and nobody thinks it is. But yet that's when it's celebrated because it coalesces with a pagan festival that occurred around the same time. Easier to rebrand something than to get people to change what they're already doing. So
yeah,
yeah, we know this happens. I mean, the one thing we can be sure of is that myths and legends sort of eat and consume and evolve and give birth to each other all the time. And it's a fascinating field of study trying to trace the origins of these stories and narratives. And one of the things you'll find is, and this is something, are you familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect?
well, I've heard of it, but I don't remember what it is.
Oh yeah, that's totally cool, man. Like, especially spaces like this, there's so many like scientific ideas and terminologies and academic things that get floated around. It can be a bit overwhelming. So yeah, no problem. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a fascinating. How would you describe it? Like it's an observation made by some psychologists that noticed that people's ability to evaluate how good they were at something tends to dramatically go up very quickly, and then reaches a certain point, and then suddenly falls off very quickly. So
Yeah,
a great example of this would be the idea that you want, say you don't speak French and you want to learn how to speak French. And then after about a week of reading about French and doing, counting to 10 and saying your name and how old you are and things, and, you start to feel like you're getting much better at French. And you would say like, hey, I'm getting really good at French. And then maybe after a couple of weeks, you say, yeah, my French is pretty good now. And then you start doing the next level, of course, and you start to realize it's getting a lot harder and syntax is coming on board. And now all of a sudden you've got these different tenses that you've got to deal with. And your confidence that you're good at, as you start to learn more about the subject, your confidence that you're good at it starts to actually decrease. So initially it went up really quickly. You felt like you were making really good progress and you were really getting a handle on it, and you'd kind of had a really good understanding of the subject matter. But as you learn more, you start to become less confident very quickly. As you start to realize how complicated the field actually is. And this isn't just languages, this is any field of study. Eventually, as you spend much, much, much longer than you ever imagined learning a subject, if you stick with it and you don't get disheartened by this sudden fall of confidence, you will start to build confidence back up again. So this would be in the space where you've now actually become an expert in the French language. But interestingly, experts in anything are never going to be as confident as those people that don't really truly understand it. Because what you'll tend to find is, you'll see this in the scientific community. Science magazine publication headlines will say, scientist proves X causes Y. That's what they'll say in the newspapers. But when you read the actual studies that support that newspaper headline, it will say, we sort of feel that there's some evidence that sort of seems to suggest on a level of scientific, probability that this is statistically significant increase in X specifically in these tested scenarios, but we may be wrong about this. And this is where we need to do more studies. Scientists talk like that. People that don't understand science say X causes Y. Right. And this is a great example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more you know, the less confident you become about making very direct statements. And I think when you're talking about sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, it's funny. I definitely experienced that myself because I've done a lot of hobbies. The issue though is, because I see what you mean. As somebody learns something, they do say more of possibly or maybe. They use those words at the same time. Unfortunately, that's not persuasive at all.
No, it's really not. It's a real problem, right? Because what happens is people learn from those people that know the least, because they are the ones willing to say something the strongest. And so we tend to respond more positively to people that are projecting confidence or projecting, I'm projecting confidence that I understand the Dunning-Kruger effect may be a really good indicator that maybe I don't understand it nearly as well as I should do. But it's a problem. And so one of the things I think when we're looking at really complicated fields is we tend to oversimplify them, and we tend to respond to those people that are confident in their oversimplifications. And I think studying the ancient belief systems of complex tribes from 2,000 years ago, 2,000 plus years ago, I think we have to be a little bit careful about how much we can really be confident that we know about these things.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, are you afraid that I definitively think that the Jews or the Christians worship an evil God, or are you just about in general?
I'm not afraid of that.
Sweet.
I just wouldn't know. I don't know that I would probably want to know how confident you were in that. If that was what you believed.
Oh, I mean, I don't believe that. I am open to the idea that sometimes people might worship an evil God, but I'm not very certain in it. Also, if I do believe somebody is worshiping an evil God, my response isn't to be violent or anything like that.
Oh, of course, yeah, no, that would be quite a leap to no, I don't think it's so much that. I guess it's just a case of, again, this would be true if you thought that they worshipped a benevolent God. Again, I'd still want to understand your confidence for such quite a large claim in some ways. These things are complicated. Jonathan, we're probably running up on the hour, so I definitely would like to talk to you again, because I feel like we've only sort of just got started. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah.
Having another conversation?
Absolutely, I really enjoyed this.
Me too, man. It's been really good. And look, once again, I just want to call out, I really appreciate how open you've been to the conversation. I don't feel like we're talking about complex and quite personal in some ways subjects, and I really applaud your openness and your willingness to say that you don't know. I think that's really cool, and I hope you don't feel like I was trying to persuade you or unfairly challenge you at all. I think it's been a really fun conversation. I've certainly really enjoyed it. I don't know what your thoughts were, and but I'd be very happy to pick up again another time, and we can put another hour on the calendar and continue the chat.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. Well, yeah, just to clarify, I definitely had very positive views of this conversation. I feel like it was, it did challenge my beliefs in a way, but definitely in a positive way.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate that, and I'm glad. And yeah, feel free if you have any questions at all, or you're not sure about anything and you want to throw me a message on Discord, just reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat. But until next time, Jonathan, and I hope that's soon. Take care, look after yourself, and yeah, we'll catch up again.
Yeah, I guess one last question: how should I try to schedule this? At least a week, or?
Yeah, I've got a hell of a hectic week coming up, so I'll send you my calendar invite system thing, and yeah, if you can find some time, ideally next week, that would be great. But whenever suits you, that's available. I'm getting pretty booked up these days, which is both a good thing and a bad thing in some ways. But but yeah, hopefully sometime next week would be great if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, dude. I wish you good luck.
Thank you. Thanks very much.